Rain was coming down hard as Robert pulled his old Honda into the parking lot of Bella Vista Restaurant. After 3 weeks of business trips, meetings that went way too long, and sleeping in different hotel rooms every night, all he wanted was a good meal at his favorite place. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, watching the raindrops race down his windshield. Robert owned 12 restaurants across the city, but Bella Vista was special. This was where it all started 5 years ago. He remembered painting the walls himself, arguing with contractors, and staying up until 3 in the morning figuring out how to make the books balance. Now look at it. The parking lot was full, even on a Tuesday night. People were actually waiting in line to get in. He grabbed his jacket from the back seat and pulled it on. It was his old leather jacket, the one his wife always told him to throw away because it had seen better days. His jeans had a small tear near the knee from when he helped move some equipment last week. His sneakers had mud on them from walking through a construction site where his newest restaurant was being built. He looked nothing like the guy in the expensive suits who sat in boardrooms and made deals with investors. As he walked toward the front door, Robert could see through the big windows. The place was packed. Every table seemed full, and the warm yellow light made everything look cozy and inviting. The smell of garlic and fresh bread hit him as soon as he opened the door. Man, he had missed this. The hostess stand was right by the entrance, and there was quite a line of people waiting. Couples dressed up for date nights, families with kids who were already getting restless, business people still in their work clothes checking their phones. Robert got in line behind them and waited his turn like everyone else. The young woman at the hostess stand looked stressed. She was probably in her early 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and makeup that was starting to wear off after a long shift. Robert had never seen her before, which wasn't unusual. With 12 locations, he couldn't know every single employee, especially the newer ones. When it was finally his turn, Robert stepped up to the stand with a smile. "Hi there. Could I get a table for one, please?" The hostess looked up from her computer screen, and her eyes immediately went from his face down to his clothes and back up again. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the kind of look you give someone when you're trying to figure out if they belong somewhere. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her finger already moving toward the computer mouse like she was ready to scroll through the list. "No, I don't," Robert said. "I was hoping you might have something available. I don't mind waiting if you're busy." The hostess glanced over his shoulder at the well-dressed people behind him in line, then looked back at Robert. Her expression had changed from stress to something else, something that made Robert's stomach sink a little. "Sir, we're completely booked tonight," she said, even though Robert could see at least 3 empty tables from where he was standing. "We probably won't have anything for at least 3 hours. Maybe 4. Robert followed her gaze as she looked him up and down again. He realized what was happening, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't looking at him like a customer. She was looking at him like someone who didn't belong here. "That's okay," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I really don't mind waiting. Is there maybe a spot at the bar where I could sit?" The hostess shifted uncomfortably. A couple behind Robert cleared their throats, obviously getting impatient with how long this was taking. The girl's cheeks turned a little pink, but not from embarrassment. From annoyance. "Sir, the bar is reserved for customers who are dining with us tonight," she said, her voice getting a little sharper. "And honestly, I think you might be more comfortable somewhere else. There's a diner about 2 blocks down the street. It's more casual." The word casual hung in the air like smoke. Robert felt his jaw tighten. Around him, other customers were starting to notice what was happening. He could hear whispers, see people pulling out their phones. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed to agree with the hostess. "I see," Robert said quietly. "And what makes you think I'd be more comfortable somewhere else?" The hostess looked around nervously. The line behind Robert was getting longer, and people were definitely starting to pay attention. She lowered her voice, but not enough. "Look, sir, this is a high-end restaurant. We have certain standards we need to maintain. I'm sure you understand." Robert understood perfectly. He understood that his own employee was judging him based on his clothes, his appearance, his car in the parking lot. He understood that she had decided he wasn't the right kind of customer for this place. This place that he had built from nothing. This place where he had personally trained the first wave of employees about treating every single customer with respect and kindness. "What kind of standards?" he asked, genuinely curious to hear what she would say. The hostess glanced around again. More people were watching now. A few had their phones out, not even trying to hide the fact that they were recording. She was trapped and she knew it, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "We have a dress code," she said, lifting her chin a little, "and we cater to a certain clientele. I think you'd just be happier somewhere that's more suited to your budget." The words hit Robert harder than he expected, not because they hurt his feelings, but because they showed him something he had been blind to. Somewhere along the way, while he was focused on expanding the business and making the numbers work, the heart of what he had built had gotten lost. He thought about his grandmother, who had given him the recipes that started this whole thing. She used to say that good food and a warm welcome should be for everyone, not just people with money. She would have been horrified to see what just happened. "I see," Robert said again. "And who decides what kind of clientele this restaurant caters to?" The hostess was getting flustered now. The couple behind Robert had given up and left the line. Other people were taking pictures. This was not going the way she had planned. "The management does," she said, her voice getting defensive. "We have policies about these things." Robert nodded slowly. He looked around the restaurant, taking in the faces of the staff he could see. Some were watching from behind the bar. Others were peeking out from the kitchen. He wondered how many of them felt the same way this girl did. How many of them had forgotten what this place was supposed to be about. He pulled out his phone not to record anything but to check the time. It was still early. The night was just getting started, and he had a feeling it was going to be a long one. "Could I speak to your manager?" he asked calmly. The hostess actually rolled her eyes. "Sir, the manager is very busy tonight. She doesn't have time to deal with situations like this." Robert almost smiled at that. Situations like this. If only she knew what kind of situation this really was. Robert stood there for a moment, letting the hostess's words sink in. The manager was too busy to deal with situations like this. He wondered what other situations she was talking about. How many other people had been turned away from his restaurant because they didn't look like they had enough money? "What's your name?" he asked the hostess, keeping his voice friendly. She hesitated, probably wondering if she was about to get in trouble. "Ashley," she said finally. "Well, Ashley, I'd really appreciate it if you could let the manager know I'd like to speak with her." "I'll wait right here." Ashley looked around nervously. The line behind Robert had grown even longer, and now people were starting to get impatient. A few were checking their watches and sighing loudly. Others were still watching the drama unfold, their phones ready to capture whatever happened next. "Sir, I already told you she's busy," Ashley said, her voice getting louder. "And I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're holding up the line and making our other customers uncomfortable." That was rich, Robert thought. He was making the customers uncomfortable? He glanced back at the people waiting behind him. Some did look annoyed, but not at him. They looked annoyed at Ashley. A middle-aged woman near the back of the line was shaking her head in disgust. A young couple was whispering to each other, and the guy looked angry. "I'm not trying to make anyone uncomfortable," Robert said. "I just want to have dinner at this restaurant." "Is that really such an unreasonable request?" Before Ashley could answer, a man in a dark suit appeared beside her. He was probably in his 30s with slicked back hair and the kind of confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. Robert recognized the type immediately. This was someone who thought being an assistant manager at a restaurant made him important. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, looking directly at Robert like he was already guilty of something. "No problem at all," Robert said before Ashley could speak. "I was just asking for a table for dinner." The assistant manager looked Robert up and down just like Ashley had done. His expression made it clear what he thought about what he saw. "I'm Kevin, the assistant manager," he said, puffing out his chest a little, "and I'm afraid Ashley is right. We're completely booked tonight and we do have standards to maintain." Robert almost laughed. Kevin was really going to double down on this? "What standards are those exactly?" Kevin's smile got tighter. "Well, for starters, we require appropriate attire. This is a fine dining establishment, not a sports bar." "I see," Robert said. "And what exactly is inappropriate about what I'm wearing?" Kevin gestured vaguely at Robert's outfit. "Come on, man. Look around. Does anyone else here look like you?" Robert did look around. Kevin was right. Most of the customers were dressed up. Suits, dresses, nice shoes. But he also noticed something Kevin apparently missed. There was a table near the window where two guys in jeans and polo shirts were eating. Another table had a woman in casual pants and a sweater. A family near the back had a teenager in a hoodie. Actually, Robert said, pointing to the table by the window. Those gentlemen are wearing jeans, and that young man over there is in a hoodie. Should they be asked to leave too? Kevin's face got red. That's different. They made reservations. They're established customers. Ah, Robert said, so the dress code only applies to people without reservations? Look, Kevin said, his voice getting harsh. I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but you need to leave now before I have to call security. The word security hung in the air like a threat. Around them, conversations had stopped. People were openly staring now. Robert could see servers peeking out from the kitchen, trying to figure out what was happening. He wondered if any of them recognized him. I'm not playing any games, Robert said calmly. I'm a customer who wants to eat dinner, but I'm starting to think this isn't really about dress codes, is it? Kevin's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? I think you know what it means, Robert said. You took one look at me and decided I don't belong here. You assumed I can't afford to eat here. You judged me based on my clothes and my car and probably a dozen other things you don't even realize you're doing. That's ridiculous, Kevin said, but his voice wavered a little. This is about maintaining the atmosphere our customers expect. What atmosphere is that? Robert asked. One where people are judged and rejected based on how they look? A woman in the line behind Robert spoke up. Excuse me, but this is getting ridiculous. The man just wants to eat dinner. Either give him a table or don't, but stop making a scene. Kevin whirled around to face her. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Actually, it does, she said, stepping out of line. I'm a customer here, and I'm watching you treat another customer terribly. It absolutely concerns me. Other people started murmuring agreement. Robert could hear fragments of conversation. This is awful. Poor guy. I can't believe they're doing this. But he also heard other voices. He doesn't belong here. They're right to turn him away. This is an upscale place. Kevin was getting more flustered by the minute. This was not how he had expected this to go. Everyone, please just calm down. We're handling this situation. No, you're not, said a man in an expensive suit who had been watching from near the bar. You're embarrassing yourselves and making the rest of us uncomfortable. Just give the guy a table or explain why you won't. But stop this nonsense about dress codes when half your customers are dressed casually. Robert watched Kevin's face cycle through confusion, anger, and panic. The assistant manager was realizing that his position wasn't as supported as he thought it would be. Some customers were on his side, but more seemed to be against what was happening. Fine, Kevin said finally. You want to know the truth? This is a business. We cater to a certain type of customer. Someone who drives up in a beat-up Honda and looks like he just came from working construction isn't our target demographic. We have a reputation to protect. The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin had just said out loud what everyone suspected he was thinking. Robert felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over him. This was his restaurant, his business, his reputation that Kevin was talking about protecting. I see, Robert said quietly. So this is really about money? About who you think can afford to eat here? It's about maintaining standards, Kevin insisted, but he sounded less confident now. Whose standards? Robert asked. Who decided what kind of people are worthy of eating here? Before Kevin could answer, Robert heard a voice from across the restaurant that made his heart skip a beat. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. Everyone turned to see a woman in a manager's uniform hurrying toward them from the back of the restaurant. She looked panicked, her face pale as she pushed through the crowd of onlookers. Robert smiled for the first time since he'd walked in. Linda had been his first hire when he opened this place. She had been with him from the beginning, had helped him paint the walls and set up the first tables. She definitely knew who he was. What's happening here? Linda asked breathlessly as she reached the hostess stand. Kevin straightened up, obviously relieved to see backup arriving. Linda, thank God, this man is refusing to leave. He's causing a scene and bothering our customers. Linda looked at Robert, and her expression went from confusion to absolute horror in about 2 seconds. Kevin, she said slowly, do you have any idea who you're talking to? The confidence drained out of Kevin's face like water from a broken cup. Ashley looked back and forth between Linda and Robert, starting to realize that something was very, very wrong. Who is he? Ashley asked in a small voice. Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked like she wanted to disappear. This, she said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, is Robert Chen. He owns this restaurant. He owns all of our restaurants. He's our boss. The words hit the crowd like a lightning bolt. Ashley's face went completely white. Kevin stumbled backward like he'd been slapped. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people processed what Linda had just said. Someone in the back of the crowd let out a low whistle. Robert watched the chaos unfold around him. Phones were coming out everywhere now. People were recording, texting, posting to social media in real time. He could practically see the hashtags forming. This was going to be all over the internet before the night was over. That's impossible, Kevin said, his voice cracking. The owner doesn't look like... he wouldn't dress like... He gestured helplessly at Robert's casual clothes. Like what? Robert asked, genuinely curious to hear how Kevin was going to finish that sentence. Kevin's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Ashley had sunk down into her chair behind the hostess stand, her head in her hands. The customers who had been defending Kevin earlier were now looking anywhere but at the scene unfolding in front of them. I think what Kevin is trying to say, Robert continued, is that he expected the owner to look a certain way. Rich, successful, the kind of person who belongs in a place like this. He looked around the restaurant, taking in the faces staring back at him. The question is, what exactly does that look like? A woman near the bar spoke up. You could have said something sooner. You let this go on for way too long, Robert turned to her. You're right. I could have. But I wanted to see how my employees treat customers when they think no one important is watching. And honestly, I'm glad I waited. This has been very educational. Sir, Linda said quietly. I am so sorry. This never should have happened. No, it shouldn't have, Robert agreed. But it did happen. And that tells me we have a much bigger problem than just two employees making bad decisions. He looked around at the crowd that had gathered. Customers, servers, kitchen staff who had come out to see what was happening. Everyone was staring at him like he was a bomb that might go off at any second. How many of you, he asked the room in general, think Kevin and Ashley were right to try to turn me away? Silence. A few people shuffled their feet. Others looked down at their phones or their drinks. But slowly a few hands went up. Not many, but enough to make Robert's point. And how many of you think they were wrong? More hands this time, way more. But still not everyone. Interesting, Robert said. So about a quarter of you think that someone who looks like me doesn't belong in a place like this. That's actually higher than I would have hoped, but lower than I feared. A man in an expensive suit who had raised his hand in the first group stepped forward. Look, I'm sorry this happened to you, but you have to understand. This is a business. Image matters. If you let just anyone in, the quality of the clientele goes down. That affects the experience for everyone. Just anyone, Robert repeated. What makes someone qualify is not just anyone. The man looked uncomfortable but pressed on. You know what I mean? There are certain standards, certain expectations based on what? Robert asked. Money? Clothes? The car someone drives? The color of their skin? Their accent? Where they live? It's not about race, the man said quickly. It's about fit, about maintaining the right atmosphere. The right atmosphere for who? Robert shot back. Who gets to decide what's right? Another customer jumped in. He's got a point, though. This is a high-end restaurant. People come here for a certain experience. If you don't maintain standards, you lose what makes this place special. Robert nodded thoughtfully. So you think what makes this place special is keeping certain types of people out? That's not what I said. Isn't it, though? Robert asked. Because that's exactly what happened here. Two of my employees decided I wasn't the right type of person to eat in my own restaurant. They made that decision in about 30 seconds based entirely on how I look. Kevin finally found his voice again. Sir, I had no way of knowing who you were. If you had just said If I had just said something, you would have treated me differently, Robert finished. But why should I have to prove my worth to eat dinner? Why should anyone? Because this is how business works, Kevin said, getting defensive again. You cater to your target market. You create an experience that appeals to the customers who spend the most money. And you think the way to do that is by judging people at the door? Sometimes, yeah, Kevin said. Look, I'm sorry you got offended, but this is reality. Not everyone belongs everywhere. The crowd stirred at that. Several people started talking at once. Robert held up a hand for quiet. Kevin just said something really important, he announced. He said not everyone belongs everywhere. And you know what? He's absolutely right, Kevin looked confused. Ashley peered up from behind her hands. Linda looked like she was about to have a heart attack. People who judge others based on their appearance don't belong in my restaurants, Robert continued. People who think someone's worth is determined by their clothes or their car don't belong on my staff. People who believe that having money makes you better than someone who doesn't have money definitely don't belong here. He turned to face Kevin directly. You want to talk about maintaining standards? Let's talk about the standards that actually matter. Treating every customer with respect. Making everyone feel welcome. Judging people by their character, not their credit card. But sir, Ashley said weakly, how are we supposed to know who's a good customer and who isn't? That's the point, Robert said. You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to treat everyone well and let them surprise you. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. Linda, I want you to pull up our customer database. Show me our biggest spenders from the last 6 months. Linda looked confused but pulled out her tablet and started typing. After a minute, she looked up with surprise on her face. What is it? Robert asked. Well, our #1 customer for the last 6 months is a guy named Tony Rodriguez. He spent over $8,000 here. What does Tony do for a living? Robert asked. Linda scrolled through the information. He's a plumber. Says here he usually comes in after work. Still wearing his work clothes, I'd guess, Robert said. What about #2? A woman named Janet Foster. She spent about $6,000. She's a school teacher. Probably not wearing designer dresses when she comes in for dinner, Robert observed. #3? David Kim, $5,000. He owns a landscaping company. Robert looked around the room. So our 3 biggest customers are a plumber, a teacher, and a landscaper. None of them would pass Kevin's appearance test, I'd bet. But they've brought in almost $20,000 between them in 6 months. The room was dead quiet now. Kevin was staring at his shoes. Ashley looked like she wanted to crawl under the hostess stand. Here's what I think happened, Robert said. Somewhere along the way, we started confusing expensive with good. We started thinking that the fancier our customers looked, the better they were for our business. But that's not how it works. He gestured toward the dining room. Some of the people eating here tonight will never come back. They'll tip badly, complain about everything, and leave negative reviews online. Others will become regulars who bring their friends and family. And you know what? You can't tell which is which by looking at them. A young server who had been watching from the back raised her hand tentatively. So how are we supposed to handle situations like this in the future? Robert smiled at her. That's a great question. What's your name? Tracy. Well, Tracy, here's a crazy idea. How about we treat everyone who walks through that door like they might become our best customer? How about we assume that everyone deserves good service until they prove otherwise? But what if someone really can't afford to eat here? Kevin asked. What if they're just trying to cause trouble? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Robert said. But we don't make that assumption at the door. We give everyone a chance. He looked around the room one more time. The crowd was starting to thin out as people went back to their tables or left the restaurant entirely. But plenty were still watching, still recording. I think, Robert said slowly, it's time for some changes around here. Robert looked around the restaurant one more time, taking in the faces of his employees and customers. Some looked ashamed, others curious, a few still defensive. The energy in the room was electric, like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Linda, he said, turning to his manager, I want you to set up the private dining room upstairs. Ashley, Kevin, I want to see both of you up there in 10 minutes. We need to have a serious conversation. Ashley looked like she might faint. Kevin was still staring at his shoes, probably wondering if his job was about to disappear. Other employees who had gathered to watch were starting to drift back to their stations, whispering among themselves. What about the customers? Linda asked, gesturing to the line that had formed again during all the drama. Robert turned to the people still waiting for tables. Most of them were checking their phones, probably reading about what had just happened or posting their own versions of the story. A few looked annoyed at the delay, but others seemed fascinated by the whole situation. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert said, raising his voice so everyone could hear him. I apologize for the disruption to your evening. What you just witnessed was completely unacceptable, and it does not represent what this restaurant is supposed to be about. He paused, looking at each face in the crowd. I want to make this right. Everyone who was waiting for a table tonight will eat for free, and I mean everyone who had to witness this embarrassing display of poor judgment. A murmur went through the crowd, A few people smiled. Others looked surprised. The woman who had defended Robert earlier stepped forward. "That's very generous," she said. "But you don't have to do that. What happened here wasn't your fault." "Actually, it was," Robert replied. "I'm the owner. Everything that happens here is ultimately my responsibility. If my employees think it's okay to judge customers based on their appearance, that means I failed to teach them better." A man near the back of the line raised his hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you let it go on so long?" "You could have stopped this the minute it started," Robert nodded. "That's a fair question. And honestly, I'm not sure I made the right choice. But I wanted to see how far it would go. I wanted to understand what was really happening in my restaurant when I wasn't around." "And what did you learn?" the man asked. "I learned that I've been so focused on growing the business that I lost sight of what made it worth growing in the first place," Robert said. "I learned that some of my employees have forgotten that our job is to make people feel welcome, not to decide who deserves to feel welcome." Another customer spoke up. "But surely you can understand their position. This is an upscale restaurant. There have to be some standards." Robert turned to face the speaker, a well-dressed woman in her 50s. "What standards are you talking about?" "Well, dress codes, behavior expectations, ways to ensure that everyone has a good experience." "I agree completely," Robert said. "We should absolutely have standards. High standards. But those standards should be about how we treat our customers, not about how our customers look." He gestured around the restaurant. "Look around this room. You'll see people in suits and people in jeans. You'll see expensive watches and digital ones. You'll see people who drove here in luxury cars and people who took the bus. And you know what? They're all here for the same reason. They want good food and good service. But what if someone comes in who clearly can't afford the prices?" the woman pressed. "Isn't it kinder to redirect them somewhere else?" "Who decides who can afford what?" Robert asked. "And more importantly, who gave us the right to make that decision for other people?" He pulled out his phone and showed her something on the screen. "See this? It's a picture of me from 3 years ago, when I was helping to renovate our third location. I'm covered in paint, wearing old clothes that I planned to throw away afterward. If I had walked into this restaurant that night, would you have thought I could afford to eat here?" The woman looked at the photo, then back at Robert. I don't know. Exactly. You don't know. None of us know. And that's why we don't judge." A younger man in the crowd raised his hand. "But come on, be realistic. Sometimes you can tell. Sometimes it's obvious when someone doesn't belong." "Doesn't belong," Robert repeated. "Based on what? Their clothes? Their accent? The color of their skin? Their age? Whether they have a disability? Help me understand what makes someone not belong in a restaurant." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I just meant, sometimes people dress inappropriately for the setting." "Like I'm dressed right now?" Robert asked. "Well, no, because you're the owner. So it's only inappropriate if you're not the owner, or if you don't have enough money, or if you don't look important enough." The man stopped talking. Around him, other customers were starting to look uncomfortable too. Robert could see them starting to question their own assumptions. "Here's what I think," Robert said. "I think we've gotten so used to judging people that we don't even realize we're doing it anymore. We see someone and we immediately start making assumptions about who to what they can afford, whether they deserve our respect." He looked directly at Kevin and Ashley, who were still standing near the hostess stand looking miserable. These two employees didn't wake up this morning planning to humiliate someone. They were just doing what they thought was expected of them. They were following rules that I never explicitly made but that somehow became part of our culture anyway. Linda spoke up. "So what do we do now?" Robert smiled. "Now we fix it. We remember why we got into this business in the first place. We go back to basics." He turned to address the customers again. "I started this restaurant because I loved the idea of bringing people together over good food. I wanted to create a place where families could celebrate, where couples could have date nights, where friends could catch up, where business deals could get made. I never wanted it to be a place where people got judged at the door." An older gentleman who had been quiet throughout the whole incident stepped forward. "Son, I've been in business for 40 years, and I can tell you that what you're talking about sounds nice, but it's not always practical. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions to protect your business." Robert respected the man's tone and experience. "I appreciate that perspective, sir. And you're right that business can be complicated. But I think protecting my business means protecting its reputation. And what kind of reputation do we have if we turn away customers based on how they look? A reputation for exclusivity, the man replied. That can be valuable. To who? Robert asked. And at what cost? Before the man could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. The doors had opened and several people were walking in, but they weren't customers. They had cameras and microphones. News crews. Someone in the crowd had obviously called the media. Or maybe they had just seen the videos that were already starting to circulate online. Either way, the story was about to get a lot bigger. Linda looked panicked. Sir, what do you want me to tell them? Robert looked at the reporters setting up their equipment, then at his employees, then at the customers who were still watching everything unfold. This was about to become very public, very quickly. Whatever he said next was going to be recorded and broadcast and analyzed and debated. He thought about his grandmother again, about the values she had taught him, about the kind of business he really wanted to run. Tell them the truth, he said finally. Tell them we made some mistakes tonight, but we're going to learn from them. And tell them that starting tomorrow, Bella Vista is going to be a place where everyone is welcome. 3 months later, Robert sat in the same spot where the whole incident had started, watching the evening crowd filter into Bella Vista. The hostess stand looked the same, but everything else had changed. The new hostess, Patricia, greeted each customer with the same warm smile, whether they were wearing a 3-piece suit or work clothes. She had been one of the servers who witnessed the incident with Ashley and Kevin, and she had volunteered to take over the position when they left. Actually, left wasn't quite the right word. After that night upstairs in the private dining room, Robert had given both Ashley and Kevin a choice. They could find new jobs elsewhere, or they could stay and help him rebuild the culture of the restaurant. Both had chosen to leave, but not before teaching Robert some valuable lessons about how his own management style had contributed to the problem. I thought I was doing what you wanted, Ashley had said through tears that night. I thought keeping out the wrong people was part of my job. What made you think that? Robert had asked, because that's what Kevin told me. He said the previous manager always talked about maintaining our image and attracting the right clientele. That conversation had led Robert to realize that the problem went much deeper than 2 bad employees. Somewhere along the way, as the business grew and he spent less time in each location, a culture of exclusion had taken root. Managers had started making decisions based on what they thought would impress Robert, rather than what would serve customers best. The news coverage from that night had been intense. The video of Kevin and Ashley trying to kick Robert out of his own restaurant had gone viral within hours. The story made national news. Restaurant industry magazines wrote articles about it. Business schools started using it as a case study. Some of the coverage was positive. People praised Robert for the way he handled the situation, for using it as a teaching moment rather than just firing everyone involved. Others were more critical. They said he had orchestrated the whole thing for publicity, or that he was being naive about the realities of running an upscale business. The immediate aftermath had been rough. Several regular customers stopped coming, saying they were embarrassed to be associated with the negative publicity. Some employees quit, worried about working for a business that was suddenly controversial. Online reviews were mixed, with some people praising the restaurant's new commitment to inclusion, while others complained that the standards had been lowered. But then, something interesting started happening. New customers began showing up. People who had never felt comfortable in upscale restaurants before started making reservations. Families with teenagers in hoodies, construction workers celebrating job promotions, teachers treating themselves to a nice dinner after a hard week, and they loved it. More importantly, they came back. They brought friends. They became regulars. The financial numbers told the story. After an initial dip in revenue during the weeks following the incident, business had not only recovered but grown. The 3-month period after the changes was the most profitable in the restaurant's history. Robert watched Patricia seat a family near the window. The father was wearing work boots and had paint under his fingernails. The mother was in scrubs, probably coming straight from a hospital shift. Their 2 kids were bouncing in their seats, excited to be somewhere fancy. 3 months ago, they might have been turned away. Tonight, they got the same treatment as the business executives at the next table. "Excuse me, are you Robert Chen?" He looked up to see a woman in her 30s standing beside his table. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, carrying a small notebook. "I am," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down." She settled into the chair and opened her notebook. "I'm Janet Foster. I believe your manager mentioned me a few months ago." "I'm the school teacher," Robert smiled. "You're one of our biggest customers." "I'm honored to meet you," Janet laughed. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I saw what happened that night. The video, I mean, and I wanted to tell you something. I'm listening. I almost stopped coming here about a year ago," she said. "Not because of the food, which is amazing, but because every time I came in after work, I felt judged. The hostess would look at my teacher clothes like I didn't belong. Servers would assume I couldn't afford wine with dinner. It was subtle, but it was there." Robert felt his stomach sink. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "The thing is," Janet continued, "I probably spend more money on restaurants than most people because I don't have kids and I love good food. But I was starting to feel like maybe I should find somewhere else to spend it." "What changed your mind?" "That night changed everything. Seeing you stand up for treating everyone with respect. Seeing you actually follow through on it. I've been here 6 times since then, and every single time has been perfect. Not just the food, but the whole experience." She closed her notebook and leaned forward. "I brought my book club here last week. 8 teachers, all spending our own money on a nice dinner. We never would have felt comfortable doing that before." Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you for telling me that. It means more than you know." "There's one more thing," Janet said. "I teach high school, and my students have been talking about what happened here. They've been debating it in class, writing essays about it. You've got teenagers thinking about prejudice and assumptions and how we treat each other. That's pretty powerful." After Janet left, Robert sat alone thinking about the journey of the past 3 months. It hadn't been easy. Changing a culture never is. There had been difficult conversations with employees, tense meetings with investors who worried about the restaurant's image, long nights wondering if he was making the right decisions. But there had also been moments like this one, stories like Janet's, messages from customers who felt welcome for the first time, employees who said they were proud to work somewhere that valued dignity over dollars. T. Patricia approached his table with a smile. "Mr. Chen, there's a gentleman at the door who'd like to speak with you." Robert looked toward the entrance and saw Kevin standing nervously by the hostess stand. He was dressed nicely but simply, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Send him over," Robert said. Kevin walked to the table slowly, like he was approaching a judge's bench. "Mr. Chen, I hope it's okay that I came by. I know I don't really have the right to ask for your time. Sit down, Kevin, it's good to see you." Kevin looked surprised but took the offered chair. "I wanted to apologize again for what happened, and I wanted to tell you that you were right about everything." "What do you mean?" "I got a job at another restaurant across town. Same kind of place, same attitude about customers. And I found myself doing the same things I did here, judging people, making assumptions. It took me a while to realize that the problem wasn't the restaurants. It was me," Robert nodded. "That takes courage to admit. I started thinking about what you said that night, about treating everyone well and letting them surprise you. So I started doing that. And you know what? My tips went up. My reviews got better. I actually started enjoying my job instead of just going through the motions." Kevin paused and looked around the restaurant. "This place looks different now, better. People seem happier." "They are happier," Robert said, "including me." "Do you think," Kevin asked hesitantly, "there might ever be a place for me here again? I know I don't deserve it, but I've learned a lot since that night." Robert studied the young man's face. He saw genuine remorse there and something else. Growth, understanding, the kind of wisdom that only comes from making mistakes and learning from them. "Actually," Robert said, "I've been thinking about expanding our training programs, teaching other restaurants how to create inclusive environments. I could use someone who understands both sides of this issue, someone who's made the mistakes and learned from them." Kevin's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. But it won't be easy. You'll be traveling to all our locations, working with managers and staff who might be resistant to change. You'll be sharing your story, admitting your mistakes in front of strangers. Are you up for that?" Kevin didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." Robert smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome back to the team." As Kevin left, Robert looked around his restaurant one more time. The evening rush was in full swing. Every table was full. The servers were busy but smiling. The kitchen was humming with activity. And at the hostess stand, Patricia was seating another unlikely group of customers with the same grace and warmth she showed everyone. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. The new training program is ready to launch. 3 other restaurant chains want to license it. Also, food critic from the Times wants to do a follow-up story. Robert typed back, "Set up the meeting with the critic. And Linda? Make sure she gets the same table as everyone else." He put his phone away and signaled for the check. As he waited, he thought about his grandmother again. She would have been proud, he realized. Not because the business was successful, but because it was kind. Because it remembered that behind every customer was a person with their own story, their own dreams, their own right to be treated with dignity. The restaurant was exactly what it was supposed to be. A place where good food brought people together, where everyone was welcome, where assumptions got left at the door along with coats and umbrellas. It had taken a painful lesson to get there, but sometimes the best journeys begin with the hardest steps. Robert left a generous tip, waved goodbye to Patricia, and walked out into the night air. Tomorrow he would start visiting his other locations, making sure they all understood what Bella Vista had learned. The work was just beginning, but tonight he was just a customer who had enjoyed a perfect meal in a restaurant where everyone belonged.